If you have ever tried to run a YouTube channel on the side, you already know what the real problem is. It is not ideas and it is not editing skill. It is consistency. Making one good video is fun. Making one every single week for months while you have a job and a life and everything else is exactly where almost everyone quits. So I did something a little different. Instead of grinding harder, I built a system that produces my videos for me end to end on my own computer. The video you are watching right now was made by that system. And in the next 12 minutes, I want to walk you through exactly how it works, what it actually costs me, and the parts that still break, because the honest version of this story is far more useful than the hype you usually hear. So what does automated actually mean? First, let me kill the fantasy. When most people hear automated YouTube channel, they picture pressing one button at night and waking up to a finished video and a pile of money. That is not what this is, and anything that promises you that is selling you something. What I built is a pipeline. It is a series of steps that each do one job well, chained together, with me sitting at a few key checkpoints, making the decisions that matter. The machine does the slow, repetitive, soul-draining work. I do the judgment. That division of labor is the entire trick. And I want to be honest, it took me a long time to be comfortable handing any of it over. The instinct when you care about something is to touch every single part of it yourself. What changed my mind was realizing that the parts I was guarding most jealously, the rendering, the captioning, the file wrangling, were exactly the parts that were not creative at all. They were just tedious. Once I drew that line clearly between the work that needs a human and the work that just needs to get done, the whole thing finally fell into place. The goal was never to remove myself from my own channel. It was to remove the busy work, so the channel survives a busy week instead of going quiet for a month. Inside Sense ang Nam, Publication Gym, it all starts with a script. Everything begins with a script, because a faceless video is really just narration with the right pictures laid on top. I keep a running list of topics that I think are worth someone's time, and I pull from a few places to fill it. What people are actually searching for, questions I see asked over and over, and things I have just figured out myself and wish someone had explained to me plainly. For each topic, I write a script of around 2,000 words, which lands at roughly 12 minutes of speech. I use an AI model to help me draft and tighten the writing, but I read and rewrite every single line. This is the most important checkpoint in the whole system. If the script is generic, no amount of clever automation downstream will save it. The model is genuinely good at structure and genuinely bad at having a point of view, so the point of view has to come from me. I write the way I would actually explain something to a friend over coffee. Short sentences, plain words, no jargon for the sake of sounding smart. And I keep one rule above all the others. If I would not say a sentence out loud to someone sitting right across from me, it does not go in the script. The model will happily write smooth, empty filler all day long, and catching that filler and cutting it back out is most of what I am actually doing at this stage. Then I hand it my voice. Once the script is locked, it needs a voice. I use a text-to-speech service called fish.audio, running a cloned version of my own voice. I recorded a few minutes of myself reading out loud, and now the system can narrate any script I give it in something very close to how I actually sound. The script file is the exact input, word for word, so what you read on screen is what you hear. Is it perfect? Honestly, no. It occasionally lands the stress on the wrong word, and it does not breathe quite the way a real person does. But it is close enough that most viewers never stop to question it, and it means I can turn a 12-minute voiceover around in under a minute, instead of recording and re-recording audio by hand for an hour. I want to be very clear about one thing here. This is my own voice, cloned with my consent, on my own channel. Doing that to someone else without their permission is a completely different thing and not something I would ever touch. I think that line matters more as these tools get better, not less. The technology itself does not care whose voice it is copying. The responsibility for using it well sits entirely with the person at the keyboard, and I would rather be clear about that now than pretend it is not a real question. Now comes the hard part, the visuals. A voice on a black screen is a podcast, not a video. So the next step is building the visuals, and this is the part that almost everyone underestimates. The system reads my finished script and for each paragraph decides what should be on the screen while I say it. Sometimes that is stock footage, what we call B-roll, pulled from a library by searching for the right phrase. Sometimes it is an animated diagram, a flowchart, or a side-by-side comparison built automatically from the actual content of that section. And the entire time, captions run along the bottom, pulled straight from the script itself, so the spelling is always correct, even for odd technical words. Those diagrams are worth dwelling on because they are what stops the video from feeling like a slideshow. A comparison of two tools becomes a clean side-by-side table. A process becomes a flow, with each step appearing in turn. A set of options becomes an animated list. The system reads the structure out of my own words and draws it, so the picture is never just decoration, it is actually carrying the point. The clever part is the timing. Every visual is anchored to a specific phrase in the narration, so the picture on screen changes at the exact moment I say the thing it is meant to illustrate. Nothing ever just sits there frozen. If a paragraph ever slips through as plain text on a static screen, that is the single thing that instantly makes a video look cheap, so the system is built to refuse to let that happen. Getting this rhythm right took more experimentation than anything else in the whole pipeline. Too few changes and the video feels flat and slow. Too many and it feels frantic, like the screen is fighting you for your attention. The sweet spot is a fresh visual every several seconds, with the diagrams given a little longer to breathe, so you actually have time to read them. Let me be honest about the cost. People always want the numbers, so here they are. The AI model I use for drafting cost me a few dollars a month at the volume I write at. The voice service is metered, and the full-length narration works out to well under $1 per video. The stock footage comes from libraries with a free tier that I have not outgrown yet. And the rendering, the heaviest part by far, cost me nothing extra because it runs on hardware I already own. So the real cost of a finished video, in actual money, is small enough that it rounds to pocket change. The expensive part was never the running cost. It was the time I spent building the pipeline in the first place and the time I still spent at the checkpoints. When people ask me how much it costs to run, they are usually asking the wrong question. The money is trivial, the time and the attention are the real bill, and I will come back to that. And I think that is true of almost any automation, not just this one. The tools have never been cheaper than they are right now. What stays expensive, and probably always will, is the taste to know what is even worth making in the first place. Then it renders on my own machine, so all of this has to become an actual video file. And this is where my setup gets a little unusual. Most people would push this step up to a cloud service and pay for every render. I do it on my own machine, on a graphics card that is honestly several years old now, a 1080 Ti. It uses the card's built-in video encoder to stitch the footage, the diagrams, the captions, and the voice into one finished file. A 12-minute video takes somewhere around 6 to 10 minutes to render. Doing it locally means it is effectively free, it runs completely offline, and nothing about my process ever leaves my house. The trade-off is real, and I will not pretend otherwise. The card is old, so it is slower than a fresh cloud machine, and if a render falls over at 2 in the morning, there is no support line for me to call. I decided that control and a zero running cost were worth more to me than raw speed. For someone else, that exact math might point the other way, and that is fine. The other quiet benefit of doing it locally is that I actually learn how the whole thing works. When something is a black box in someone else's cloud, you just file a ticket and wait. When it runs on the machine sitting under my own desk, every failure is something I can open up and understand, and that understanding compounds over time. There are two small steps that make the difference between something that looks automated and something that looks genuinely made. First, every video opens with a title card for a few seconds, and the system trims the very start so the video begins right on the first spoken word, instead of a slide just sitting there. It is a tiny thing that viewers feel without ever noticing it. Then the finished file gets handed to the upload step, which writes the title, the description, and the tags, and pushes it to the channel. That final stretch, the actual publishing, is the piece I am still wiring up properly for this particular channel. So for right now, I check every file myself before it goes anywhere. I will get there, and when I do, I will probably regret not doing it sooner, but I would much rather publish a little slower than wake up to the wrong video sitting on the wrong channel. So where does it still break? Because it does break regularly. The boring truth about automation is that the last 20% of the work eats most of your time. The voice mispronounces a name and I have to nudge the spelling until it sounds right. A stock clip comes back wildly off topic for a phrase and I swap it out. A diagram turns out too dense to actually read in the 3 seconds it is on screen. Early on, I had a bug where a blank green slide would play for 20 full seconds because a visual had failed silently, and the only way I caught it was by watching the whole render back. Another time, the captions doubled up on themselves because the system and the voice disagreed about where one word ended and the next began, and every line came out looking garbled. Each of those bugs was invisible until I actually sat and watched the output, which is the slowest possible way to find the problem. Every one of those little disasters taught me to add a check. So now the system inspects its own output, samples a handful of frames, and tells me when something looks wrong before I ever see it live. That feedback loop, the machine quietly checking its own work, is the thing that turned this from a fragile toy into something I genuinely trust. The lesson I keep relearning is that automation is not about writing one perfect program that never fails. It is about building something that fails loudly and safely so that when it does break, and it always eventually will, you find out in a few seconds instead of after 1,000 people have already watched it. So should you build this too? Would I tell everyone listening to go build this? Honestly, no. If you make one video a month and you actually enjoy the editing, then this is an elaborate solution to a problem you simply do not have. Building the pipeline took real time and it only pays you back across dozens of videos. But if you are trying to publish consistently in real volume and it is the editing grind that keeps killing your momentum and your motivation, then moving that repetitive work onto a system like this one is genuinely the thing that lets a channel survive. I want to be straight with you about what it did and did not do. It did not magically make me a more talented creator. It just made it possible to keep showing up week after week, and it turns out that showing up is most of the whole battle, and it did not replace anyone. It quietly replaced the part of the work I was honestly going to skip anyway, and that, to me, is the real case for this kind of thing. Not that it does the work for you, but that it does the part you were always going to avoid, so the part that actually matters finally gets done. So that is the entire pipeline, from a blank script to a finished video, most of it running while I sleep. I am going to keep building on this, and I will break down each piece in much more detail in future videos, the scripting, the voice, the visuals, each one on its own. If that sounds like your kind of thing, subscribe and follow along because there is a lot more coming. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.